Welcome, colleagues. This is I'm looking forward to a wonderful talk today. This is the Oxford Interfaith Forum, one of the most exciting places to sit and think about the way that religion, faith communities, philosophy, and science interact. And today we have an extraordinary guest. I'm Lori Zoloth. I teach at the University of Chicago, where I teach ethics in the divinity school and the medical school. And I'm joined today by Professor Ramanathan, who's a distinguished professor of atmospheric and climate sciences at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, University of California, San Diego. He leads innovative research projects involving global climate dynamics, the greenhouse effect, air pollution, and climate mitigation. Professor Ram chairs the United Nations Environmental Program co-sponsored project ABC with science team members from the United States, Europe, India, China, Japan, Korea, and other Asian countries. He's the recipient of many national and international awards, such as the Tyler Prize for Environmental Achievement, the Zayed International Prize for Environment, the American Meteorological Society's Carl Gustav Rossby Medal, the Volvo Environmental Prize, the Buys Ballot Medal by the Dutch Academy of Sciences. And in 1921, he was awarded the Blue Planet 2021 prize. Professor Ram has been elected to the American Philosophical Society, the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences by Pope John Paul II, the Academia Europaea, the Third World Academy of Sciences, and to the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. He's been part of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was co-awarded the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize since its inception, and for the 2007 report, served as one of the lead editors in the panel's Working Group 1 report. He is currently the Edward A. Frieman Endowed Presidential Chair in Climate Sustainability. It is an extraordinary honor to have you here. I very much look forward to what you have to say. As you know, Scripps was one of the first and most important, still one of the most important places for climate science in the world. And it is it's lovely to see you here. And the floor is yours.
Lori, thank you very much. Let me start with the title, Climate Crisis. It's normally called climate change. And with my own research and others, it's now well documented that climate change has morphed into climate crises just in the last 5 years. So the process started about 10 to 15 years ago. And I'll show you a few examples of that. So the question I've been asking myself, it started when I turned 60, that was 18 years ago. How are we going to bounce back? And it just dawned on me about 5 years ago that we had to think about this in a whole new way. And I wrote a paper on this new way last year. And this is the first such talk I'm giving, where I'm trying to assemble all of these together. How are we going to bounce back? So the question I want to bring it up to you is that why am I not presenting to scientists, but chose this audience of Interfaith Forum? It's because in this new way, religion and interfaith forum like the Oxford Forum, and there are many others, have to play a major role in getting us out of this crisis and bouncing back healthier and stronger. Okay, so let me just briefly mention my own background in this area. I'm a climate scientist, as Lori mentioned, and I've been working on this problem for at least 49 years. I started in 74. My first paper was published in 75. Then I joined a team of NASA engineers to design satellite experiments, satellite instruments to look at Earth. What are heating the Earth? What are cooling the Earth? How are the processes globally? Then after about 20 years, I realized I need to really get into the atmosphere and track down these pollutants and see how they are heating the planet. So I started using drones and miniaturized instruments into these drones. Now, of course, drones are on the front page with the Russia-Ukraine war. But those days it was mainly used by scientists, and we were probably the first to fly 3 drones simultaneously, one over the other, and we probed. This is pollution off of South Asia, heating up the whole Indian Ocean. So the question is, what did I learn from 40 plus years of observing the earth? There are 2 things I want to convey to you. Everything we see around us, the clouds, the air, the oceans, the land, etc., is in a delicate balance to protect our well-being on this planet. What do I mean by that? For example, right temperature for water to exist as vapor, as liquid, so we can drink water, and as ice, which serves many practical purposes for us. So our planet, compared to all the other planets we know, is indeed in a Goldilocks zone, just at the right temperature. The second lesson I learned is that everything is connected, and any change, however small, in any corner of the earth is felt by everyone. Not unlike COVID, an infection in one corner of the earth can create a global pandemic. Okay, so let me go on to the, just give you a brief thing, where did my journey begin? My personal journey began in this South Indian village. This home where you see these 4 kids blissfully happy, sitting in the veranda, is just next to my grandfather's home. I went to this village as a treat to myself for my 60th birthday. That was in 2004. Watch 2 things. It fits into my story today about bouncing back. So why are these kids topless? It was just way too hot. I still remember. I couldn't wear a shirt when I was a young kid like that. And the second is, why are they sitting instead of playing? First, look at their feet. They don't have footwear. Many of them, I'm going to talk about this, can't afford to buy sandals, particularly for the parents if they have 6 kids, and they keep growing out of their footwear. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about adaptation to climate change. And I'm going to say that there's no one thing there. It has to fit the local needs, and we'll talk about that, okay? So where did I used to go all my, till I was in high school, all my summers to this really amazing village. So where did my resilience journey began? When I turned 60, 2004, I was in the Maldives island launching these drones. And I got this letter, which made me super excited, personally from Pope John Paul II's office, that they have elected me to the Pontifical Academy. That is where I learned to think about the climate change in a much, much broader scope than just doing observations and science. You know, the first 3 years when I went to the academy for meetings, once a year they hold meetings under all topics under the earth, okay? On religion, on science, on ethics, etc. I was thinking they will find out that I'm not a Catholic. Mm-hmm. In fact, I'm not even a Christian and throw me out. It was much later when they appointed me as the council member, I realized this composition of the members are multiracial, international, and importantly, non-sectarian. Imagine that, okay? And there are about 80 of us, and 1/3 of them are Nobel laureates in physics, chemistry, biology. And the church, both under John Paul II, then next under Pope Benedict, and then Pope Francis, encouraged me to organize series of meetings on climate change. I'm doing it to this day. But my cathartic moment to go from science into solutions came in 2007. This was a meeting held at the UN General Assembly. Secretary General Ban Ki-moon just became the Secretary General, and this was the first meeting he organized. Imagine that, on climate change. Only invited high school students from around the world. At the end of my talk, I sat back in my seat, and someone was tapped me on the back of my shoulder. I turned around. This was a high school student. She was from Ethiopia, and she asked me, "Dr. Ramanathan, you made us cry with your data. Tell me what you are doing personally to save the planet." I was embarrassed. I had nothing to tell her. And I think I remember telling her, doing science is my way to save the planet. But I realized as I was answering to her that was just not enough. Scientists need to get into solutions. Okay. So let me give you a 1-minute background of the entire climate change science. Okay, I'm condensing my one semester lecture into just one slide. So why is the planet is heating up and we are causing it? So the question is how? And the main culprit, but at least 50 to 60% of the heating is caused by one gas, carbon dioxide. It's called CO2, okay? So anytime you take fossil fuels and burn it, the fossil fuel is what we call hydrocarbons, hydrogen and carbon attached together. When you burn it, it releases energy. But in the burning process, the carbon combines with the oxygen in the air, becomes carbon dioxide, okay? The fundamental problem with this carbon dioxide is once you emit it, it stays for centuries. Imagine that, okay? So since 1850, the dawn of the industry and civilization, which started in the United Kingdom, we have emitted 2,400 billion tons of CO2 into the air. That's 2.4 trillion tons or 2,400 billion tons. And one of the fundamental measurements was made by a scientist called Keeling at the institution I come from. His data and others show above our head, there are still 1,000 billion tons, 1 trillion tons of this carbon dioxide is covering the entire planet like a blanket, okay? Just imagine, just to give you an idea how huge it is, the entire solid waste we throw into our junk, into the oceans, into our forests, that solid waste is only 1 billion tons. This carbon dioxide is 1,000 times in that. And the sad thing is, your eye can't see a gas. So that's why we don't see this blanket. It is best to think of it as a blanket. People call it various names, greenhouse effect and all that. But the blanket metaphor to me is the most accurate one. So how does it heat the planet? How does a blanket keep you warm on a cold winter night? The blanket doesn't give any heat. It does not radiating heat, throwing heat at you. It is simply that the blanket traps the body heat and keeps your body warm. Otherwise, that heat coming from the earth would have escaped to space, okay, and kept our planet cool. So just keep that in mind. There's 1 trillion tons thick of a blanket, and we are adding 40 billion tons every year. That's 40 billion, 10 to the 9. So that's the problem. And there are other gases, which was what my work are also contributing to this, close to 40%, okay? So that's why the planet is heating up and this emission is increasing, so the blanket is thickening. We have warmed the planet by about 1 degree as of 2016. And there was a study, this data which made this climate change, global warming, into a climate crisis. And this was the United Nations report. I'm summarizing, since the time the brilliant engineer, Mr. James Watt, a British engineer, invented or improved the steam engine, our heart temperature extremes has increased by 180%, okay, over the last 100 years or so. Precipitation frequency has increased 30%. Most of this happened in the last 40 years, okay? Droughts in our, farm regions have increased in frequency 70%. Just looking at the sheer weather disaster numbers have increased by 400%. The total loss of life is few million deaths, and the loss of economic value is 3,600 billion, or 3.6 trillion. So that is why I call it climate change has morphed into climate crises. So what's in future? We published this prediction in 2018. And at that time, the United Nations was saying the 1.5 degree warming will happen in around 2050. We said, no, it's going to happen by 2030. In the report UN released 2 years ago, they revised it and they said it's going to early 30s, so 2030. So that's why I'm saying, so the warming is going to go from 1 to 1.5, not 50 years from now, not 30 years from now, 7 to 10 years. It's just around the corner. And this is my speculation below. When that happens, I'm at least 80% certain it'll happen. Like COVID-19, climate change will move into all our living rooms. Right now, about 4 billion are affected. By that 1.5, all of us would experience it directly or indirectly. So now I'm going to move on to the solutions in the new way, but keep this thought in your mind. Like COVID, an infection anywhere can travel everywhere. Emissions anywhere cause global warming everywhere. Why? Because these gases stay for decades to centuries, and the air can move them around. So the air can move, say, for example, my emission in San Diego, in less than 2 to 3 years, it can take the carbon dioxide I emit in San Diego to Antarctic, Arctic, everywhere, okay? So it's a global problem, and we need global cooperation to solve this. Certain can take a lead, and I'll talk to you about that. So there are 2 things, justice issues, we want to keep in mind. It is this issue which I talked to Pope Francis about, and I'll bring it up later, okay? My wife and I, I took a sabbatical in 2014, and we traveled in villages in India, starting from south where I come from. This is the Himalayan village. I was a guest of this woman and her husband and her family, house guest, and she's cooking my breakfast. You see that she's burning firewood. Why? Because either she can't afford fossil fuels, or she has no access. There's just no gases coming there. Believe it or not, 3 billion people on the planet still rely on primitive fuels. That's 40%. Let's say the total population is 8 billion. 85% of the emissions comes from the 50% of the population, wealthy and middle class. Out of that 85, 50%, 50 out of the 85 comes from just the wealthiest 1 billion, okay? And why is this? In fact, Pope Francis called it a moral issue. As scientists, we can't use the word moral, so we use ethical. So why is that an ethical issue? In the climate crisis, the top 1 billion, I belong to the top 1 billion, I know how to protect myself and my family, my children and my grandchildren, under heat stress, etc. I have the technology. The bottom 3 billion who had almost no role in this pollution are the most vulnerable. One flood would wipe out that mud hut this woman is living, you're seeing there. Okay? A fire, she has no chance. So who's causing it? I still think about every time I get on a plane, how many such women and their family I'm sending them into despair. Okay, so that is the ethical issue. So I think of the world as 3 worlds: top 1 billion, middle 4 billion, middle income, and the bottom 3 billion. Okay, my new way, we have to find solutions for these 3 groups separately. What is the other big issue? Remember I said once you emit the carbon dioxide, it stays for 100 years. So if we don't do anything about it, I have predicted this and several scientists have predicted it. There is a 5% probability somewhere between another 30 to 40 years, this could become an existential threat, a 5% probability. And you can say, oh, that's so low, why do we have to worry about this? But if I tell you there's a 5% probability of 1 in 20 chance of that plane you're getting into would crash, you won't take it. You won't take it even if I tell you there's a 1 in 1,000 chance. Why is that? There's 1 in 5 to 10 million, very ultra low probability a plane we get on would crash. So we get on it. But our grandchildren and grandchildren have to get on that plane. That's 2050 to 2070. So that is called intergenerational equity issue. The previous one was intrageneration. Okay? So all of that have to be kept in mind. And you have to keep this in mind when I say there is a new way. Okay. Oh, sorry. So let me put this all together. I gave a talk on climate extinction crisis, climate change at Cambridge University 3 years ago. At the end of my talk, a cartoonist summarized my whole talk together. It's just a brilliant cartoonist. I put the icons outside that circle, okay? On the left side is science. Scientists are telling us that the game is not over. We still have another 10 years to bend that emissions curve. On the right-hand side top are the engineers, technologists, solution experts, and private industry. So their main challenge, and they figured out most of them, is, we have to scalable solutions. You can come with fancy solutions, but if they're not scalable, if they can't be taken to the bottom 3 billion, you have no chance. Okay, it has to reach out to everyone. But the finance, some of them, the private sector is supporting, I'll tell you how much, but it needs government and policy to let loose that money, make it easier for the private sector to spend. That's on the left-hand side, policymakers, bottom. They hold all the right cards because they have the science, they have the solutions, but they don't have the massive public support we need, and that's when the right-hand side, but we need your support. So in my new way, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on how do we get that public support, okay? At least in America, half the public do not support climate actions. So my new way, number one, is first, we talked so far, when we talk about climate change, we talk about polar bears, we talk about ecosystem, and we talk about sea level rise. It has worked on half the population, but we need to bring in the whole population. So what I've been proposing last 10 years, and now many support that view, we need to pivot to public health when we talk about climate change to people. Physical health, and I'll tell you, because of the work of a brilliant neuroscientist at UCSD, I'm persuaded that we need to think about mental health too, maybe even a bigger issue. I'll talk about that. And the other issues I put in lighter shade, I've not taken it up yet: food and water, personal property and well-being. I would love to hear from this group during discussion if you have any suggestions. What should we talk to people about so that we get everyone on board? Just to give you some climate and health, climate problem equal to health problem, air pollution from fossil fuel, what comes out of our tailpipes. You see, the gases, carbon dioxide, warm the planet, but there are other pollutants which kill us. Close to 3.6 to 10 million deaths from asthma. I'm a severe asthma patient myself, so I know the problem with asthma and air pollution. There's heart disease, lung cancer, etc., etc., etc. And then weather extremes are slowly becoming a major threat to deal with. About 606,000 have died in the last 20 years. And if you look at 20 to 30 to 40 years, 4 billion people have been impacted. Okay, that's the bad side. What is the good side? If you look at the major environmental regulations the world has taken, particularly America and the Western nations, there are 3 DDT after Rachel Carlson's famous book that was involved the health of people and health of the ecosystem. Clean air regulations. We tried saying the air pollution is destroying our forests, acid rain, etc., etc. Not much action. It is only when we link to health, we have to give a big thanks to epidemiologists. All the clean air regulations started in full force. And CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, which destroyed the ozone layer, were phased out because of the ozone was protecting our skin from UV, so depleting the ozone layer would cause skin cancer. All justified by health effects. Okay, so we have a good precedence to take the climate problem, changing the narrative to public health. And what is being projected, we are expecting, if we don't take much actions beyond what we are taking now, we are going to reach the 2-degree threshold in about 30 years from now, 25 to 30 years. The prediction is about 1.5 billion would be facing deadly heat. 600 million would be subject to new vector-borne diseases, dengue, Lyme disease, etc., etc., etc. There's going to be widespread droughts and water shortage. And I worry about the last one, mass displacement and migration. You have this 3 billion. You take their livelihood, where are they going to go? And as you know, America is dealing with a huge migration issue. I feel unchecked climate change would have much, much more severe migration challenges, okay? So I organized a meeting in 2017, about 5 years ago, at the Vatican, and we came with the statement: climate change caused by burning of fossil fuels and others poses an existential threat, okay, through health issues. And in 2022, just last year, 200 medical journals released a joint statement: climate change is the greatest threat to global public health. This was spearheaded by the British journal Lancet, because they've done some phenomenal work on this. So it's not that I'm saying this. Most experts, the health experts, are saying this now. Okay? So I thought that was pretty dramatic and extreme. But then Dr. Jyoti Mishra, she's married to my son, so I know her work quite well. She's a neuroscientist, but dedicated to taking the knowledge and translating into actions. And she did a detailed study of one of the worst fires we have had in 2018, Camp Fire, further north of San Diego, where I am, in Northern California. So she sampled 3 populations: directly exposed, indirectly exposed, and not exposed at all. okay, 3 control population, found chronic effects, that is, effects lasting longer than 6 months, and 3 times greater prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder, 1.5 to 2 times greater prevalence of depression and anxiety. Okay, fire is something we are expecting is going to happen worldwide. Already Southern Europe is facing similar situations like California. And how about floods? Look at Pakistan. Millions are still out on the street after a year, after last year's floods. India, severe heat waves. So this, to me, is a major new threat emerging. Okay, we have to pay attention to this. So that takes me to the new way too, bouncing back, okay, from climate resilience. So what I'm saying is that we need to work urgently on building resilience. So what does resilience mean? It's got a wide range of interpretation. The one I chose, I liked, is the capacity to prepare and plan for, absorb, recover from, and adapt to climate risks and bounce back. Okay, the bouncing back, to me, is the idea of creating a sustainable planet for generations to come. Okay, and in my paper, after reviewing all the available studies, I came up with the strategy, 3-pillar strategy. So how do we build resilience? Obviously, if we don't cut the emissions and the warming goes 3 degrees, 4 degrees, there is no way you can build any resilience, okay? And people are talking about extinction. So we have to mitigate to reduce risks. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't cut the emissions. We have to reduce the risks, okay? But so far, our focus has been just on mitigation. And now UN has realized they're saying the same thing, that we need to bring in adaptation. So the second pillar is adaptation. Remember I said the 1.5 degree warming is already in the bag. It's going to happen no matter what we do, because it's too soon for us to do anything in the next 7 to 10 years. So the risks are going to increase. Most of us think the risks are still manageable. So that is where we need to spend effort to bring people into adaptation. And it's my own inference, based on my series of meetings at the Vatican, talking to social scientists, economists, etc. Neither of the two are going to happen in full force, mitigation or adaptation, without societal transformation. I play a lot of emphasis on this. And I believe scientists, policymakers have to form an alliance with faith groups and religious institutions to take that societal transformation at the individual level. Okay? So in terms of resilience, this is the adaptation part. I put a list of 3 priority items. We have to protect the public against heat stress. Physical and mental health services, I place a strong emphasis, particularly for the 3 billion, they have no access to proper health service, and they need energy access for the poor, okay? But it applies to all groups, don't get me wrong, but we need to pay attention to how are the poorest 3 billion, they're just not millions or billions, and how are we going to do that, okay? So now I come to transform. That icon is for society. Transform society or societal transformation. I see those 3 components, and that's what I'm going to end my talk with. First is we need to educate and empower. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking about educating, maybe sending them to colleges and schools. Some it is, but others different. Okay, so it has to be tailored to individual needs. I think we need three categories: climate champions. Everyone should be a climate champion. Climate stewards, who are the policymakers and scientists, others, and then climate warriors. These are the youth groups, engineers and technologists make things happen, okay? And then we need to science policy, faith alliance to unpack climate change from all the issues that divide us, cultural issues, racial issues, gender issues, etc., etc. Particularly America seemed to be divided, no matter what the issue is. I'm not a political scientist. I am not an economist, but just observing, looks like we have become two divided, separate countries. We need to bring them back together. And this was given by Dr. Jyoti Mishra, the one who did the mental health. Change from short-termism, we go for short-term. Apparently, thousands of experiments have done. And we always go for short-term benefits versus long-term. And she is showing that different parts of the brain come into play in choosing one over the other. Okay, that is key in terms of climate change. I want to get on my car and go to the shopping to take care of my needs. I don't think about when I do that, what it's doing to my children and grandchildren's future. So we need to focus on that. So just what I have been doing, we created the Bending the Curve curriculum. Myself, and I have a tremendous help from a social scientist, Fauna Frieman and Heidi Hahn. She's in Johns Hopkins now. Roper and Freezy were the ones who really produced it. So we created 3 courses anyone can take. First is that, the blue icon you see, that's a book 25 of us wrote on climate solution. It's available online, totally free. And it was funded by the Bill Gates Foundation. We created a college level course. It started in many, many campuses in California and also in Sweden. And we created a public version, MOOC. And then the private sector, we are just releasing a course just for the private sector, top executives, educating them on how. And it's just a 2-hour lecture series. The college course is about 20 lectures, okay? We then took it to create, this was a summit we held. I teamed up with the University of California, Dean of UCLA School, Marcelo Suarez Brasco. He's now a Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, and California State University. Between the two systems, CSU has over 20 campuses, UC has 10 campuses. We educate close to 90% of college students. And so we are creating a cater to, it has been launched, just received state funding. I'm hoping in about 5 years, every kid in California would have this knowledge about climate change and what they can do about it. So now I'll come to my last topic. My realization that religions have a huge role to play, and we need to, form an alliance with them. And I entered it with some trepidation because, as you know, science and religion working together has a checkered history in the past. But I saw what was happening at the Vatican, and I am emboldened to think. In fact, we wrote an editorial. Das Gupta is an economist from Cambridge University. We organized this meeting at the Vatican in 2014. We concluded finding ways to develop a sustainable relationship with our planet requires ultimately also a moral revolution. Remember, we're not supposed to use that word moral as opposed to saying ethical, but we did. And we said religious institutions can and should take the lead on bringing about such a new attitude towards creation. These are languages, phrases like creation, I would have never dared to use, but this came in one of the top science magazines. It's called Science in the American magazine. And at the end of this meeting, I had the unique honor of briefing Pope Francis. Normally after we meet, either he comes to our last session or we go to his office or the Pope's receiving palace and take half an hour to brief him. But on that day, something happened. He was named the Person of the Year by Time magazine, so they landed on him. So all I got was 2 minutes to summarize our meeting at the parking lot outside the St. Peter's Basilica. So I told Pope Francis 2 things. First is I told him the climate change issues becoming a climate crisis. Then I told him that, 3 billion people who had almost nothing to do with this are going to suffer the most. And 8 months later, Pope Francis released his encyclical on climate change. It's one of the best and unique climate change document. Why? It's the first such document which was written with scientific credibility, because our academy reviewed the science in that document. And I was one of 2 or 3 reviewers who had given comments and advice on it. But it's the first document connect climate change with human condition. He summarized this whole intragenerational equity issue brilliantly in 1 sentence. He says there, cry of the earth should be heard with the cry of the poor. And that still, it brings me, really touched me deeply. But I want to mention, just like the Oxford Forum, there are many, many, many groups, religious groups, faith-based institutions who are advancing the cause of climate change. One of them is this called Faith for Earth. It is a United Nations organized program, and they're bringing in all religions. And so good things are happening. So let me end with that positive note. Let's not forget what we are trying to do is to protect the future of these, amazingly joyful, happy kids. They had nothing to do with this, and they're going to suffer the worst if we don't do anything about it. But fortunately, there is still time to protect. And there are 6 areas already. Amazing things are happening. I told you about the Science and Policy Alliance. There is the youth movement. Everyone thinks of Greta Thunberg, but there are a number of youths. In fact, I get on average a letter from a high school student once every few weeks about a project they're doing. Private sector is coming in a huge way. 85% of the CEOs already know or acknowledge that the climate change is a serious issue. There are numerous green energy policies worldwide. Renewable costs are coming down. There are a tremendous number of nature-based solutions. We all think of planting trees, but there are many, many different such solutions. In other words, the compass is pointing the right direction. What we need is to increase the speed at which we are implementing these solutions. Thank you very much. It was a privilege to join you.
Lori, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, I was on mute. I want to say thank you so much for really a wonderful, wonderful and thoughtful lecture. Now I'd like to expand the conversation by inviting everyone here to raise questions. You can, the best way to do this is to use the reaction button and choose a hand and raise your hand, and then I can call on you by name, which if you're shy, you can put your question in the chat and I will find it there and ask the question on your behalf. I want to start, while you're thinking of questions, by asking 3 questions of my own, raise 3 questions. Despite everything that we know, this was a record year for carbon emissions. The last several years have been a record year for carbon emissions, even during the pandemic, and a record year for profit for the extraction companies. A record year. They made more profit last year than they had ever made before. Individual executives made profit, companies made profit, stock market prices rose, even in economic recessionary times. they're not going to stop doing that unless we build a movement that makes that impossible. So what do you say when you go to the C-suite and say to them, you can't make a profit by extraction anymore, that there's something deeply immoral about the companies? Because the reality is my individual choices, your individual choices, while important, are a drop in the bucket compared to their rapacious need for profit, for that kind of international capitalism that sustains this. So what do you say to them?
I think it's an excellent question, Laurie, and a vexing one. Okay, just to quickly bring up three issues in what you're saying. Yes, that's why I claim what we need is the speed. Okay, we have the solutions, and to get that speed, we need public support. Okay, and the second issue I want to bring out is that there are many say, oh, we have to change. My societal transformation does not necessarily involve changing people's behavior, because those technologies are still expensive. Let me just share you my experience, okay? I converted all my appliances from gas to electric heat pumps. It costs $35,000. Who has that kind of money?
Right.
I am old, I didn't have any responsibilities of sending children to college, etc. So the technologies are still expensive, number two. And third is that how do you bring these energy fossil fuel companies to the table? Okay. And I think in America, that is, we have to persuade the skeptics, the public. So I feel if the public support is there, then our government has the money to spend. And with sufficient incentives, the renewables would become more accessible, affordable. Okay, so at least I'm in discussion with the certain members of the White House to see, can we have a dialogue where we bring in religion to bring in the conservative public to the table and give them the data they need to see. So I've talked to at least, I would say, about 5,000 to 6,000 church goers, because meetings are organized churches and universities like Chicago, which has a seminary school. They bring people together. And invariably, particularly the evangelicals I've talked to, the response was, Professor Ram, we didn't know there is so much data. We thought it was all junk, fake science. So you see, Laura,
Right.
You and me and half of America, we are in one echo chamber. And we thought the media is the way to communicate, but the media has become polarized.
Right.
And we need to find a way to talk to the public. And I'm thinking only bishops, priests, synagogues is where people can be reached. And that is why I'm pushing this alliance. But it's a slow process. I'm not claiming that it's going to happen now. It's a slow process, but we have to start that process.
I hardly agree with you.
Our job, I see, Professor, just give them the information, not tell them what to do. Give them the information and ask them, are you willing to send your child on that plane?
Well, we've come to the end of the hour, and it is wonderful to end on that hopeful message. A lovely, hopeful message, and gives us cause for optimism in a dark world. I just want to say that thank Professor Ramanathan for his extraordinary, both for his persistent optimism, his persistent work over decades. He's led us in this understanding, and he continues to lead. So we owe you a great debt of gratitude. It's really extraordinary. And thank you for being in the places that really matter, the Vatican, the C-suite, the UN, all these places that matter, and bringing this clarity of the necessity for religion from the perspective of a scientist, right there. It's extraordinarily important. I also want to say before we end, I'm going to give you a chance to say some final words, and then just say before people leave that next week Adele Berlin is going to be giving a talk to the Interfaith Forum, Oxford Interfaith Forum, on Psalms, on the theme of exile and restoration in the Psalms. Adele Berlin is one of our great scholars of Jewish studies, someone I admire greatly, and she teaches at the University of Maryland, or taught at the University of Maryland, and that's going to be on the 11th at the same time as the normal time for the. It's noon in Chicago, but it's wherever time it is where you are. So, and the chat has the actual link, so you can register for that. So don't miss that. And then I want to end by giving you the very last word, Professor. You have anything you want to say at the end before we close?
No, I wanted to thank the Interfaith Forum and Thea for inviting me. This is just an excellent forum to air such views. So thank you.
And best of luck
Thank
in the continuation of this process. That we're very lucky to be on the first leg of your journey.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone.